Christopher Carson, better known as Kit Carson, was born on December 24th, 1809 in Kentucky, and was the sixth out of 10 kids in his family. Growing up, Kit was small for his age and would remain so for his entire life. When he was only 8 years old, his father was killed in a work accident, and Kit was forced to work on the farm to help provide for his family. As Kit Carson would later say in his own words, quote, "I jumped to my rifle and threw down my spelling book, and there it lies." He would remain illiterate for the rest of his life. When he was 14, Kit became an apprentice to a saddler in Franklin, Missouri, which was located on the eastern end of the Santa Fe Trail, meaning most of the people coming through the shop were trappers, traders, and mountain men. He became obsessed with the adventures he heard about the West. After 2 years, he decided to leave his apprenticeship. In August of 1826, at just 16 years old, Kit Carson headed west. Signing on with a merchant caravan, he could not have known that he would become one of the most legendary mountain men, not only in his day, but of all time. A quote from the book Blood and Thunder by Hampton Sides says, "As a fur trapper, scout, and explorer, he had traveled untold thousands of miles in the Rockies and the Great Basin and the Sierra Nevada and the Wind River Range and the Tetons and the coastal ranges of Oregon. As a hunter, he had crisscrossed the Great Plains any number of times following the buffalo herds. He had seen the Pacific, been deep into Mexico, pushed far into British-held territories of the Northwest. He had traversed the Sonoran, Chihuahuan, and Mojave deserts, gazed upon the Grand Canyon, stood at the life-leached margins of the Great Salt Lake. He had never seen the Hudson or the Potomac, but had traced all the important rivers of the West, the Colorado, Platte, Sacramento, San Joaquin, Columbia, Green, Arkansas, Gila, Missouri, Powder, Bighorn, Snake, Salmon, Yellowstone, and the Rio Grande." Carson was present at the creation, it seemed. He had witnessed the dawn of the American West in all its vividness and brutality. In his constant travels, he had caromed off of or intersected with nearly every major tribal group and person of consequence. He had lived the sweep of the Western experience with a directness few other men could rival. Another quote from the book, "Out west, Carson had learned to speak Spanish and French fluently, and he knew healthy smatterings of Navajo, Ute, Comanche, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Blackfoot, Shoshone, Paiute, among other native tongues. He also knew Indian Sign Language, and one way or another could communicate with most any tribe in the West." It's clear that Kit Carson was an experienced and well-traveled man with dozens of adventures to speak of. But for now, we're going to focus on the 1835 Man Rendevu, which Kit Carson was attending off the Green River in southwestern Wyoming. The Man Rendevu was an annual gathering held from 1825 to 1840 in different locations across Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho, attended by trappers, fur traders, adventurers, and various native tribes. They would gather to sell their furs, trade for supplies, swap stories, and make plans for the upcoming year. Likely seeing friends they hadn't seen for a full year. There was also lots of celebrating, drinking, and gambling. These events would usually last up to a month. It was not uncommon for mountain men to marry women from various native tribes. This being the case, the annual rendezvous was a popular time for courting possible wives. At this rendezvous, there were around 2,000 Shoshones with smaller numbers of Flathead, Nez Perce, and Arapaho natives, likely with members of other tribes with them. The Arapaho people came from the western Great Lakes region to the northern plains sometime before the 1700s, and becoming a nomadic horse tribe closely allied with the Cheyenne. They had a large territory including most of Wyoming, parts of Montana, Colorado, and Nebraska. They were known among natives, Europeans, and Americans as skilled warriors and traders. Among the Arapahoes was a woman named Singing Grass, or Wa-Ni-Be, who had caught the attention of a 25-year-old Kit Carson, as well as another man named Joseph Shanard. Shanard was a French-Canadian trapper. He was a large man and known as, quote, "the bully of the mountains." One night at the Arapaho camp, Singing Grass chose Kit over Shanard to be her partner in a ceremonial dance. Shanard was not happy with this and began to constantly insult her and disrespect her during the following days. He also went on a days-long bender and became increasingly hostile to everyone around him, which apparently was quite in character for him. People were used to this behavior from Shanard and simply just ignored him. Tired of being ignored, he walked over to the American camp and began insulting Americans in general, calling them schoolboys and saying he could switch them just like a school teacher. Kit Carson was known to be a calm and respectful man, but he was also known to have no tolerance for bullies and have a furious temper when provoked. In his own words, he said, quote, "I did not like such talk from any man, so I told him that I was the worst American in camp." He then told him to stop now or he was going to rip out his guts. A threat like this was a very serious thing among mountain men, and Kit and Shanard both went to get ready for a fight, arming themselves with guns and no doubt carrying their knives and tomahawks as well. Meanwhile, hundreds of mountain men and Indians, including Singing Grass, were crowding around to watch the duel. Both men then rode into the clearing that had formed in the camp, Kit riding his horse he had named Apache. The men walked their horses towards each other so close that their horses' heads touched. They were cursing and insulting each other the whole way. Both men then raised their guns and fired, so close at the same time that people who witnessed it claimed that they only heard one gunshot. Somehow, neither of the men were killed. Kit was grazed by the bullet and burned by the gunpowder, and bore a scar under his left ear for the rest of his life. Shanard, however, had been hit in the hand, the bullet blowing off his thumb and going through his wrist, a very serious injury, especially so far into the frontier. Now this story has sort of a mysterious ending, with Kit Carson's only words about the duel later being that the camp, quote, had no more to bother with this bully of a Frenchman. There's 3 possible endings to this story. One is simply that Shanard was able to heal and survive. The other is that his wound became infected and he died from the complications. The last popular theory is that Carson killed him with a second shot right there. It very well could be true, and certainly wouldn't be the first time he had killed a man. But after reading so much about Kit Carson and the way he carried himself, I don't know if I believe that he would have executed a man that he had already beat. But this was a very different time and a very violent place in the world, and Shanard had directly insulted him, the woman he cared about, and his country. It's just one of those things in history that we will have to only speculate about and decide for ourselves what we think happened. We do know, however, that Kit Carson would go on to marry Singing Grass, giving her father Running Around 3 mules and a new gun, asking for his blessing. They were married in a traditional Arapaho ceremony. They had 2 daughters together and were very happy until Singing Grass died from sickness in 1839. She was only 30 years old. This is just one story in the legendary and eventful life that Kit Carson lived. I plan to cover more adventures from his life in the future. He would go on to become an explorer, a soldier, an Indian agent, even becoming a folk hero back east and in Europe.